Hello, everybody. Today it's another reading in Neal Stephenson's In the Beginning Was the Command Line. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to remind everybody this book is from 1999, and I advise you all go pick up the actual copy so that you can read the notes and other text that just really doesn't, that I'm not going to be able to read during this recording. And I want to point out it's 1999 again because for people who might not be familiar with this book, you just got a lot. One of the cool things about this, and I mentioned the other readings, is you're looking at history here. And there are so many things that were so popular and cool and trendy in the 1990s and even 80s he references. But today, either they're not relevant, people don't know about it, or in some cases, they've just turned, the tables have turned. Back when this book was written, Apple was like the underdog. They were just trying to survive. They were like on the verge of bankruptcy. But you look at Apple now as I record this, they're a $3 trillion company. The underdog is now the big boy. So it's just interesting to read this stuff, to get a good sense of history and stuff, and, see how it affects life today. But anyway, we're going to go on with the next chapter, the interface culture. A few years ago, I walked into a grocery store somewhere and was presented with the following tableau vivant. Near the entrance, a young couple were standing in front of a large cosmetics display. The man was stolidly holding a shopping basket between his hands while his mate raked blister packs of makeup off the display and piled them in. Since then, I've always thought of that man as the personification of an interesting human tendency. Not only are we not offended to be dazzled by manufactured items, but we like it. We practically insist on it. We are eager to be complicit in our own dazzlement. To pay money for a theme park ride, vote for a guy who's obviously lying to us, or stand there holding the basket as it's filled up with cosmetics. I was in Disney World recently, specifically the part of it called the Magic Kingdom, walking up Main Street, USA. This is a perfect, gingerbready, Victorian small town that culminates in a Disney castle. It was very crowded. We shuffled rather than walked. Directly in front of me was a man with a camcorder. It was one of the new breed of camcorders, where instead of peering through a viewfinder, you gaze at a flat panel color screen about the size of a playing card, which televises live coverage of whatever the camcorder is seeing. He was holding the appliance close to his face so that it obstructed his view. Rather than go see a real small town for free, he had paid money to see a pretend one, and rather than see it with the naked eye, he was watching it on television. And rather than stay home and read a book, I was watching him. Americans' preference for mediated experiences is obvious enough, and I'm not going to keep pounding it into the ground. I'm not even going to make snotty comments about it. After all, I was at Disney World as a paying customer. But it clearly relates to the colossal success of GUIs. And so I have to talk about it some. Disney does mediate experiences better than anyone. If they understand what OSs are and why people use them, they could crush Microsoft in a year or two. In the part of Disney World called the Animal Kingdom, there is a new attraction. The place looks more like what I have just described than any actual building you might find in India. All the stones in the broken walls are weathered, as if monsoon rains have been trickling down them for centuries. The paint on the gorgeous murals is flaked and faded just so, and Bengal tigers loll amid stumps of broken columns. Where modern repairs have been done to the ancient structure, they've been done not as Disney engineers would do them, but as thrifty Indian janitors would, with hunks of bamboo and rust-spotted hunks of rebar. The rust is painted on, of course, and protected from real rust by a plastic clear coat, but you can't tell unless you get down on your knees. It is, in other words, a prophecy of the bottleneck. The scenario, commonly espoused among modern-day environmentalists, that the world faces an upcoming period of grave ecological tribulations that will last for a few decades or centuries and end when we find a new harmonious modus vivendi with nature. Taken as a whole, the frieze is a pretty brilliant piece of work. Obviously, it's not an ancient Indian ruin, and some people or people now living deserve credit for it. But there are no signatures on the Maharaj Game Reserve at Disney World. There are no signatures on anything because it would ruin the whole effect to have long strings of production credits dangling from every custom worn brick as they do from Hollywood movies. Among Hollywood writers, Disney has the reputation of being a real wicked stepmother. It's not hard to see why. Disney is in the business of putting out a product of seamless illusion, a magic mirror that reflects the world back better than it really is. But a writer is literally talking to his or her readers, not just creating an ambience or presenting them with something to look at. Just as the command line interface opens a much more direct and explicit channel from user to machine than the GUI, so it is with words, writer, and reader. The word, in the end, is the only system of encoding thoughts, the only medium that is not fungible, that refuses to dissolve in the devouring turn of electronic media. The richer tourists at Disney World wear t-shirts printed with the names of famous designers, because the designs themselves can be bootlegged easily and without impunity. The only way to make clothing that cannot be legally bootlegged is to print copyrighted and trademarked words on it. Once you have taken that step, the clothing itself doesn't really matter. And so a t-shirt is as good as anything else. T-shirts with expensive words on them are now the insignia of the upper class. T-shirts with cheap words, or no words at all, are for the commoners. But this special quality of words of written communication would have the same effect on Disney's product as spray painted graffiti on a magic mirror. So Disney does most of its communication without resorting to words. And for the most part, the words aren't missed. Some of Disney's older properties, such as Peter Pan, Winnie the Pooh, and Alice in Wonderland, came out of books, but the authors' names are rarely, if ever, mentioned. And you can't buy the original books at the Disney store. If you could, they would all seem old and queer, like very bad knockoffs of the purer, more authentic Disney versions. Compared to more recent productions like Beauty and the Beast and Mulan, the Disney movies based on these books, particularly Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, seem deeply bizarre and not wholly appropriate for children. That stands to reason, because Lewis Carroll and J.M. Barrie were very strange men, and such is the nature of the written word, that their personal strangeness shines straight through all the layers of Disneyfication like x-rays through a wall. Probably for this very reason, Disney seems to have stopped buying rights to books altogether, and now finds its themes and characters in folk tales, which have the lapidary, time-worn quality of the ancient bricks in the Maharaj ruins. If I can risk a broad generalization, most of the people who go to Disney World have zero interest in absorbing new ideas from books. This sounds snide, but listen. They have no qualms about being presented with ideas in other forms. Disney World is stuffed with environmental messages now, and the guides at Animal Kingdom can talk your ear off about biology. If you follow those tours home, you might find art, but it would be the sort of unsigned folk art that's for sale in Disney World's African and Asian themed stores. In general, they only seem comfortable with media that they have been ratified by great age, massive popular acceptance, or both. In this world, artists are like the anonymous, illiterate stone carvers who built the great cathedrals of Europe and then faded away into unmarked graves in the churchyard. The cathedral as a whole is awesome and stern in spite and possibly because of the fact that we have no idea who built it. When we walk through it, we are communing not with individual stone carvers, but with an entire culture. Disney World works the same way. If you're an intellectual type, a reader or writer of books, the nicest thing you can say about this is that the execution is superb. But it's easy to find the whole environment a little creepy, because something is missing. The translation of all its contents into clear, explicit written words. The attribution of the ideas to specific people. You can't argue with it. It seems as if a hell of a lot might be being glossed over, as if Disney World might be putting one over on us, and possibly getting away with all kinds of buried assumptions and muddled thinking. Why are we rejecting explicit word-based interfaces and embracing graphical or sensorial ones, a trend that accounts for the success of both Microsoft and Disney? Part of it is simply that the world is very complicated now, much more complicated than the hunter-gatherer world that our brains evolved to cope with, and we simply can't handle all of the details. We have to delegate. We have no choice but to trust some nameless artist at Disney or programmer at Apple or Microsoft to make a few choices for us, close off some options, and give us a conveniently packaged executive summary. But more importantly, it comes out of the fact that during this century, intellectualism failed, and everyone knows it. In places like Russia and Germany, the common people agreed to loosen their grip on traditional folkways, mores, and religion, and let the intellectuals run with the ball, and they screwed everything up and turned the century into an abattoir. Those wordy intellectuals used to be merely tedious. Now they seem kind of dangerous as well. The written word is unique among media in that it is a digital medium that humans can nonetheless easily read and write. Humans are conversant in many media, music, dance, painting, but all of them are analog except for the written word, which is naturally expressed in digital form, i.e., it is a series of discrete symbols. Every letter in every book is a member of a certain character set. Every A is the same as every other A, and so on. To traditional cultures, especially word-based ones such as Islam, this is infinitely more threatening than the B-52s ever were. It is obvious to everyone outside the United States that our arch buzzwords, multiculturalism and diversity, are false fronts that are being used in many cases unwittingly to conceal a global trend to eradicate cultural differences. The basic tenet of multiculturalism, or honor and diversity, or whatever you want to call it, is that people need to stop judging each other, to stop asserting, and eventually to stop believing that this is right and that is wrong, this true and that false, one thing ugly and another thing beautiful, that God exists and has this or that set of qualities. The lesson most people are taking home from the 20th century is that in order for a large number of different cultures to coexist peacefully on the globe, or even in a neighborhood, it is necessary for people to suspend judgment in this way. Hence, I would argue, our suspicion of and hostility towards all authority figures in modern culture, as David Foster Wallace has explained in his essay, E Unibus Plurum. This is the fundamental message of television. It is a message that people absorb anyway after they have steeped in our media long enough. It's not expressed in these high-falutin terms, of course. It comes through as the presumption that all authority figures, teachers, generals, cops, ministers, politicians are hypocritical buffoons, and that hip, jaded coolness is the only way to be. The problem is that once you have done away with the ability to make judgments as to right and wrong, true and false, etc., there's no real culture left. All that remains is clog dancing and macrame. The ability to make judgments, to believe things, is the entire point of having a culture. I think this is why guys with machine guns sometimes pop up in places like Luxor and begin pumping bullets into Westerners. They perfectly understand the lessons of McCoy Air Force Base. When their sons come home wearing Chicago Bull caps with the bills turned sideways, the dads go out of their minds. The global architecture that has been conveyed into every cranny of the world by television is a culture unto itself, and by the standards of great and ancient cultures like Islam and France, it seems grossly inferior, at least at first. The only good thing you can say about it is that it makes world wars and holocausts less likely, and that is actually a pretty good thing. The only real problem is that anyone who has no culture other than this global monoculture is completely screwed. Anyone who grows up watching TV, never sees any religion or philosophy, is raised in an atmosphere of moral relativism, learns about civics from watching bimbo eruptions on network TV news, and attends a university where postmodernists vie to outdo each other in demolishing traditional notions of truth and quality, is going to come out into the world as. The only real problem is that anyone who has no culture other than this global monoculture is completely screwed. Anyone who grows up watching TV, never sees any religion or philosophy, is raised in an atmosphere of moral relativism, learns about civics from watching bimbo eruptions on network TV news, and attends a university where postmodernists vie to outdo each other in demolishing traditional notions of truth and quality, is going to come out into the world as one pretty feckless human being. And again, perhaps the goal of all this is to make us feckless so we won't nuke each other. On the other hand, if you're raised with some specific culture, you end up with a basic set of tools that you can use to think about and understand the world. You might use those tools to reject the culture you were raised in, but at least you've got some tools. You may be asking, what the hell does all this have to do with operating systems? As I've explained, there is no way to explain the domination of the OS market by Apple/Microsoft without looking to cultural explanations. And so, I can't get anywhere in this essay without first letting you know where I'm coming from vis-a-vis contemporary culture. Contemporary culture is a two-tiered system, like the Morlocks and the Eloi in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, except that it's been turned upside down. In The Time Machine, the Eloi were an effete upper class, supported by lots of subterranean Morlocks, who kept the technological wheels turning. But in our world, it's the other way around. The Morlocks are in the minority, and they are running the show because they understand how everything works. The much more numerous Eloi learn everything they know from being steeped from birth in electronic media directed and controlled by book-reading Morlocks. That many ignorant people could be dangerous if they got pointed in the wrong direction, and so we've evolved a popular culture as A, almost unbelievably infectious, and B, neuters every person who gets infected by it by rendering them unwilling to make judgments and incapable of taking stands. Morlocks who have the energy and intelligence to comprehend details go out and master complex subjects and produce Disney-like sensorial interfaces that Eloi can get the gist without having to strain their minds or endure boredom. Those Morlocks will go to India to tediously explore 100 ruins, then come home and build sanitary, bug-free versions. Highlight films, as it were. This costs a lot because Morlocks insist on good coffee and first-class airline tickets, but that's no problem because Eloi like to be dazzled and will gladly pay for it all. Now I realize that most of this probably sounds snide and bitter to the point of absurdity. Your basic snotty intellectual throwing a tantrum about those unlettered Philistines. As if I were a self-styled Moses, coming down from the mountain all alone, carrying the stone tablets bearing the 10 Commandments carved in immutable stone, the original command line interface, and blowing his stack at the weak, unenlightened Hebrew worship and images. Not only that, but it sounds like I'm pumping some sort of conspiracy theory. But that is not where I'm going with this. The situation I describe here could be bad, but doesn't have to be bad and isn't necessarily bad now. It simply is the case that we are way too busy nowadays to comprehend everything in detail, and it's better to comprehend it dimly through an interface than not at all. Better for 10 million Eloi to go on the Kilimanjaro safari at Disney World than for 1,000 cardiovascular surgeons and mutual fund managers to go on real ones in Kenya. The boundary between these two classes is more porous than I've made it sound. I'm always running into regular dudes, construction workers, auto mechanics, taxi drivers, galoots in general, who were largely illiterate until something made it necessary for them to become readers and start actually thinking about things. Perhaps they had to come to grips with alcoholism. Perhaps they got sent to jail, or came down with a disease, or suffered a crisis in religious faith, or simply got bored. Such people can get up to speed on particular subjects quite rapidly. Sometimes their lack of a broad education makes them overamped to go off on intellectual wild goose chases, but hey, at least a wild goose chase gives you some exercise. Sophisticated people deride Disney-esque entertainments as pat and saccharine, but if the result of that is to instill basically warm and sympathetic reflexes at a preverbal level into hundreds of millions of unlettered media steepers, then how bad can it be? We killed a lobster in our kitchen last night, and my daughter cried for an hour. The Japanese, who used to be just about the fiercest people on earth, have become infatuated with cuddly, adorable cartoon characters. My own family, the people I know best, is divided about evenly between people who will probably read this essay and people who almost certainly won't. And I can't say for sure that one group is necessarily warmer, happier, or better adjusted than the other. Okay, let's go ahead and stop reading here for today. That was a long chapter, so I'd like to do is comment on it, and then we'll pick up the next chapter next time. Okay, he talks. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter about multiculturalism. I first entered college in 1993, and that was the new buzzword. And he talks about monoculture, people becoming the same. Yeah, you kind of see that. And he talks about, like the TV broadcasting culture or mass media and digital. Yeah, I mean, when I came to Korea in 2007, like Koreans and stuff, they already knew our movies, TV shows. They knew our actors, actresses. Man, they were pretty hip on what we were up to, what we were about. So TV, or if you will, digital and computers and, all that, had spread information. It's very interesting. Take what he says about whatever you talk about here about removing tradition, removing culture, blah, blah, blah. Now, put that in the year 2022. If you have the wrong opinion, people are afraid to have the wrong opinion. Think about 2022 with cancel culture and all. So pretty much everything he talks about there that was kind of like developing in the 90s has fast forwarded and accelerated to the modern day. Very interesting to hear about, to read over this. And also he's talking about the interface. I think it's a very interesting concept of looking at the GUI. To understand the GUI, you have to understand the culture. And there's kind of like, I think, some truth to that. It is something that is designed for people in our culture originally, this say like America, who are not technically savvy on the command line, say working with our culture and stuff, we designed a graphical interface that people could use. And again, it's kind of true what he says. This mass adoption, these technologies that make things easier to adopt and use are great for spreading the information and making it more accessible to people. But in the process, you kind of dumb things down for people. And that's got a pro and a con. By dumbing things down, you get the word out, so to speak. But also by dumbing it down, people are getting to the point where they're not getting the full story. They're not really learning the skills or so. They're just learning little pieces of it. And like he says, hey, it's, some is better than none. Or some is better than none. But anyway, that's enough rambling for right now. Thanks for listening to this, and catch you next time. Bye.